Full Stack Basics presents Master JavaScript. Unlock the power behind the frameworks.
We're going to now cover truth number 5.
Frameworks hide complexity, but you're still responsible when it breaks.
This episode proves that when it comes to form handling and validation, you don't really need React, a UI library, or some fancy package. What you really need before going into frameworks is an understanding of events, conditions, and the DOM. So we're going to build a login form with both vanilla JavaScript and with React so that you can see what I mean here. First, go ahead and open your DevTruths projects folder. And in here, I want you to create a new folder. I'm going to name mine DevTruths-form validation. And this is the folder that we're going to use for the vanilla JavaScript version. So now that the folder is created, please go ahead and open it with VS Code. Now that we have the folder open in VS Code, let's go ahead and create the style.css file. And in here, we're going to include styling for the body, pause and implement. I'm going to also include styling for the form and the input, pause and implement. I'm going to save to reformat. I'm going to scroll a little more, and then we want also styling for the error and the button. Please pause and implement this. Next, we're going to create our index.html. Do that, then do exclamation mark and tab to create the boilerplate HTML document. Next, we are going to connect our style.css with this document, and we're going to change the title as well. So please pause and do this. Now we're going to work on the body. And the first thing I'm going to do is include a form with the ID of logging-form. Please go ahead and do the same. Once this is done, you can get rid of this action here. We won't need it for our project. I'm going to open up the form, and then inside, first we're going to include an H2 or a title that reads login. And then what I'm going to include is pairs of input fields and a div that will show an error if there's any, like so. Let me save just to reformat. Please pause and implement what you have here so far. I'm going to include now the input for the password. Go ahead and implement this. And finally, I'm going to include a submit button that reads login. Pause and implement. I'm going to minimize the form tag and everything that is included in it, just so that you can verify that you included everything where it needs to be. Now that I have minimized this, I am going to include the script tag for a JavaScript file called form.js, which we still have to create. Pause and implement this. Now we can quickly go ahead and create our form.js file like so. Now that you have created the file, we need to manipulate the following elements. First, we need to have access to the form, and we need to have access to each one of the input fields and the div with the errors. Please pause, implement, and also go ahead and open this to the right so that you can clearly see what elements we are getting control over here in our JavaScript file. With this done, with every form, the main thing that you want is to listen for the submit event. So we're going to get our form as the event listener whenever it's submitted. Then what we're going to include here is a simple function that takes an event as a parameter. Please pause, implement, and make sure that you have the syntax correctly. Next, we want to prevent the default behavior of the submit action. Please pause and implement. Next, we want to do 3 quick things here. Well, not before I actually take this off, because this E has to match the parameter that the function is taking, which is the event. Now, the next three things are, I'm going to create a flag called valid, which I'm going to initialize as true. Then I am going to initialize the email error to blank, and the same with the password error. I'm going to save to reformat. Please pause and implement. With that, we can now include some validation logic. First, if the email doesn't include the @, then what we want to do is simply load the email error text content with please enter a valid email, and then we're going to set valid to false. Please pause and implement. Next conditional logic we want here is for the password. We want the password to be at least 6 characters. Please pause and implement. Lastly, since we set valid to false whenever there are validation errors, we will only alert the user of successful login if valid remains true. We also want to clear up the form so that we are ready to log in again. So I'm going to include one last validation here, right at the bottom, but once again, we're still working within this anonymous function that we have in the event listener. So here, if everything is valid, we clear the fields, and then we display an alert that reads login successful. Pause and implement. With this done, I'm going to save this. And now we can go ahead and open this with Live Server. Over at the browser, if we try to log in without any email or password, it's going to tell us, hey, you know what? You need these fields. If I try to log in with a valid email and a password that is at least 6 characters, then we get the alert, login successful. Perfect. So what have you learned here? Well, you used core JavaScript, no libraries, to do the following. You are handling the submit event, you are validating the input, you are updating the DOM with any errors, and you are, of course, preventing the default behavior of the form whenever it's submitted. This is a great way to really understand how these things work in frameworks like React, which is what we're going to do next.
This premium content is brought to you by Full Stack Basics JavaScript Bundle. Create a full stack Kanban board prototype with Vanilla.js and the Gem stack, including registration, login, and drag and drop functionality without libraries. Next, create a production-ready Kanban board with the Mern stack, including Google single sign-on and drag and drop. Learn more at fullstackbasics.io/projects.
Let's go ahead and create a new React application from scratch. This way, the code will be more readable. So I am going to use the following command, npm create vid@latest space DevTruths form validation React. This is the name that I'm giving it. Then there is a space here, dash dash, another space, dash dash, and then template React. So go ahead and hit enter. And what you're going to notice is that this will create a new folder inside of our DevTruths projects folder. Perfect. So now what we're going to do is open this new React project with our VS Code so that we can install the dependencies and then start working on the form validation. I'm here in the new React application for form validation. We're going to do a little bit of cleanup first. Let's go ahead and install all the dependencies so that we can run the application when we're done. So just do npm install. That will get you your node modules folder. Go to index.css, delete everything out of here. We don't need anything here. Make sure it's blank. We're going to go to app.css, and first we're going to delete everything. Make sure that everything is gone from there. And then we're going to include the following styling here in app.css. First, I'm going to start with styling for the body and the form. Pause and implement. And then I'm going to move on with styling for the input fields, the error, and the submit button, like so. Pause and implement this. Now we can head back to our app.jsx, where we're going to delete the logos. We're going to get rid of the count, and we are going to simply get rid of everything in between the fragment here. because that's boilerplate code that we got with Vite. So please pause and clean up your app.jsx. With this done, now we're going to start setting up a few things. The first thing we're going to do is include some state variables. First, we want state variable for the input fields in the form, email and password, which we're going to initialize as empty. And the same thing we're going to do with errors. Now this time, useState is going to have an object. This object has two fields, the email and the password error, which are initialized blank. Pause and implement. Next, we're going to create a function that handles the form submission like so. This function takes an event as a parameter. Please pause and implement. Now, the logic in this handle submit function, which is the logic that we want to invoke when the form is submitted, is going to be fairly similar to what we have done so far. And here the lesson is that you need to know JavaScript anyway to know React. We want to prevent default. We want valid to be initialized as true. And then here, the only difference is that since we are using state variables now, we want to store the new errors in this object right here. So go ahead and pause and implement what we have here for now. The next thing that we're going to do is start including the conditional logic. If the email is missing the @, pause and implement. And then of course, if the password is less than 6 characters, pause and implement this. Next thing we want to do is that if there are errors, we're going to set the state variable errors with any new errors that get picked up if the conditions fail. Pause and implement. Lastly, the logic here is going to be very similar. If the form is valid, we clear the form and then we alert the user login successful. Please pause and implement. Now let's go ahead and minimize this handle submit function now that you have implemented it. And let's go ahead and work on the JSX. So here in the return function, I am going to simply include the brackets. I'm going to keep this fragment here, and I'm going to include a form with the class of form, like so. Please pause and implement. Now, this form, when it's submitted, and for this React gives us out of the box a prop called onSubmit, which will do the same action as the event listener. I am listening for when the form is submitted, and when the form is submitted, I will call this function that we just implemented. Please pause and implement here. Next, I'm going to make some room because we're going to keep working inside our form. So I'm going to include the same h2 as our title. Pause, implement here. Going to make some room to include the input field along with the div for the errors. Please pause and implement. Now that this is implemented, there is something that is going to happen here that doesn't happen in the vanilla JavaScript. Here, we need the property of onChange. But why? Because this capture changes to the email and password state variables, which, as you can see here by this value prop, are directly linked to the state variables that we created up here. So we need to capture those changes so that we can ultimately set the value and submit the form. Very important. Pause and make sure that this is implemented properly. Now let's do the same thing for the password. I'm going to make some room here, scroll up so that it's clear that we are including this in the form. Save to reformat. Please pause and implement. And lastly, of course, we want the button so that we can submit the form. Pause and implement. Now with this done, we can actually go ahead and run our React application. Meet me over at the browser. Over at the browser, we can try and log in. We get the same errors, but if we use correct data, we get the success. Perfect. So some thoughts here. Now, the React version is fairly clean, but this is the important part. You still had to write the same logic. You had to handle the events. You had to handle the input tracking. You also needed conditional rendering for the errors. So if you see here, the framework really didn't save you from the core work. It just moved it into a component based. So this is very important because this proves that if React breaks and you don't know how to validate a form in vanilla JavaScript, well, you're going to be stuck, right? But if you do, you'll fix it fast. This is very important. So now that we have this done and that both apps work, I'm going to leave you to it, and I'll see you in the next controversial truth.